The air in my room was suffocating, thick with the stale scent of something metallic and faintly sweet, like ancient blood or rust. I lay pinned, eyes open, but unable to move a single muscle, a familiar terror seizing me. This time, however, it wasn't just the crushing weight on my chest or the shadowy figure, impossibly tall and gaunt, looming silently at the foot of my bed. This time, its presence was physical, palpable, in a way that defied the boundaries of dreams. My gaze, locked rigidly forward, fixed on the bare wooden floor beside my nightstand. There, bathed in the sickly green glow of the digital clock, lay a small, dark object. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. A cold dread, unlike any I'd ever known, seeped into my bones, far deeper than any sleep paralysis had ever wrought. It had crossed a line. It had left something, and it was still watching. It all began truly, not with that horrific discovery, but years before, with a recurring unwelcome guest in my bedroom. I've always been prone to sleep paralysis, ever since I was a teenager. For most of my adult life, I'd learned to live with it, to manage the terror, to understand it as a glitch in the brain's wiring. My episodes were textbook. I'd wake up, unable to move a muscle, a crushing weight on my chest, and the distinct, terrifying sensation of a presence in the room. Usually it was a dark, amorphous shadow, sometimes a hooded figure, sometimes just a heavy, malevolent feeling that pressed down on me from the corner of the room or the foot of my bed. I'd close my eyes, concentrate on wiggling a toe, tell myself it wasn't real, and eventually the paralysis would break, allowing me to gasp for air and sit up, heart hammering. It was always a relief, followed by a profound exhaustion. I'd even developed coping mechanisms. I'd set up my room in a particular way, all electronics off to minimize light, a small fan for white noise, and my bed positioned against the wall, giving me a sense of being less exposed. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, so my hours were flexible, which often meant working late into the night and then sleeping well into the morning. This routine, while giving me freedom, also meant my sleep schedule was often erratic, a known trigger for my sleep paralysis visitor. I knew the drill, the science, the psychology. It was inconvenient, terrifying in the moment, but ultimately a phenomenon I understood, or at least I thought I understood. The first hint that something was changing came subtly, insidiously, a few months before I found that object. It was a particularly rough week. A tight deadline had me pulling all-nighters, and my sleep was fragmented and deep when it finally came. One night I jolted awake, already trapped. The familiar pressure on my chest was there, the suffocating silence, the inability to move. The shadow figure was at the foot of my bed, closer than usual, its indistinct form seeming to ripple at the edges of my vision. But this time there was something new, a sound, faint at first like static, then clearer, a low, guttural murmur. It wasn't a voice I recognized, and it wasn't speaking in any language I knew, yet it felt directed at me. It felt deliberate. I remember straining my ears, trying to decipher the unintelligible sounds through the veil of fear. It was like hearing someone speak underwater, rhythmic and low. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. My eyes darted around, desperately searching for anything that would break the spell. The figure seemed to lean in, its form becoming more defined, less like a shadow and more like a decaying, stretched silhouette of a person. The murmuring intensified, a chorus of unintelligible whispers from the dark swirling around me. It was no longer just the terror of being unable to move. It was the terror of being addressed, acknowledged by something that shouldn't be real. When I finally broke free, gasping and drenched in sweat, I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing. I turned on all the lights, checked under the bed, in the closet, even behind the curtains. Logically, I knew there was nothing there. It was just an auditory hallucination, a natural, albeit rare, extension of sleep paralysis. That's what I told myself. But the memory of those sounds, those low, insidious rumbles that felt like they were coming from inside my own skull, lingered. It was the first crack in my carefully constructed rationalization. This wasn't just my brain misfiring anymore. This felt personal. The next few weeks were a blur of fragmented sleep and heightened anxiety. Every night I dreaded going to bed, terrified that the whispers would return. And they did. Each time, the shadowy figure seemed a fraction more solid, a fraction closer. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still nonsensical. They were like a secret language, just out of my grasp, constantly echoing in the periphery of my paralyzed consciousness. I started feeling cold spots in my room, even with the windows closed and the heater on. My normally meticulously organized desk would sometimes have an item slightly askew, a pen that had rolled off my notebook, a stack of papers nudged to the side. Nothing major, nothing I couldn't attribute to my own clumsiness or the cat, but these small discrepancies began to accumulate, chipping away at my sense of security. I even wondered if I was sleepwalking, though I'd never done so before. It was an unsettling thought, a subtle erosion of my control over my own space. One morning, after a particularly vivid and prolonged episode where the shadowy sleep paralysis visitor had seemed to hold its head close to mine, its whispers a dry, rasping breath in my ear, I finally managed to break free. I lay there heart pounding, trying to regulate my breathing. As the adrenaline slowly receded, I noticed something odd. My room, usually dark in the early morning thanks to blackout curtains, seemed to have a faint, silvery glint near my nightstand. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and looked closer. There, resting on the polished surface of my wooden nightstand, was a single, iridescent feather. It was a beautiful thing, unlike any bird feather I'd ever seen, impossibly long, with a faint, almost metallic sheen, and a faint, sweet smell, like dried lavender. It definitely wasn't from any bird in my neighborhood. My first thought was that it must have come from my pillow, some exotic down, but I knew my pillows were synthetic. My windows had been closed tightly all night. Even if a bird had somehow gotten in, which was impossible, where would it have gone? I picked it up, expecting it to be flimsy, but it felt strangely solid, almost like a thin piece of worked metal, yet unmistakably a feather. I turned it over in my fingers, a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just a misfiring brain or an auditory hallucination. This was tangible. This was real. And it had appeared in my room, seemingly out of thin air, immediately after an encounter with it. I spent the entire day trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a craft feather from an old project I'd forgotten about, but I'd never done anything with feathers. Perhaps it had fallen off my clothes from somewhere I'd been. Unlikely, given its unique appearance. The more I tried to find a logical explanation, the more the impossibility of it gnawed at me. The feather felt significant, a physical manifestation of the entity's presence. It was the first tangible proof that my episodes were not just internal phenomena. The lines between my nightmares and my waking reality, which I had always so carefully kept separate, had just begun to blur. And that feather was lying right there, a silent, beautiful, terrifying declaration that it wasn't just in my head anymore. It was in my room. My rationalizations crumbled. This wasn't just evolving sleep paralysis. This was an intrusion. The whispers, the shifting figure, the small displacements, and now this feather, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. My sleep paralysis visitor had found a way to bridge the gap. It wasn't just observing me from the corner of my mind. It was leaving things behind. It was marking its territory. And the feather, innocent as it looked, felt like an opening salvo, a first communication. It felt like a warning, or perhaps even an invitation. The familiar terror I'd grown accustomed to, the predictable cycle of fear and relief, had been irrevocably altered. A new, far more insidious game had begun. The feather became a morbid centerpiece on my nightstand, a constant, silent reminder of the impossible. I didn't dare throw it away, almost as if doing so might anger whatever left it. Instead, I encased it in a small, clear plastic box, sealing it off, yet keeping it visible. It was a bizarre, self-imposed ritual of acknowledging the impossible while trying to contain it. My nights became a battlefield, I tried everything: meditation, strict sleep hygiene protocols, even sleeping with a light on, something I'd never done before. Nothing worked. The episodes became more frequent, more intense, and the shadowy figure, which I now mentally referred to as the visitor, seemed to grow bolder. The whispers intensified too, no longer just a guttural murmur, but a more complex, almost melodic drone that still made no sense but vibrated with an undeniable malevolence. Sometimes I'd swear I could hear my name, distorted and drawn out amidst the cacophony of sound. There were times I would fight against the paralysis with every fiber of my being, straining until my muscles ached, desperately trying to open my mouth, to scream. The feeling of being completely helpless, of being utterly at the mercy of this entity, was far worse than the initial fear. I remember one specific night. The pressure on my chest was so immense I genuinely thought I was suffocating. The visitor was right over me, its indistinct face mere inches from mine, and its whispers were like dry ice fog pouring directly into my ears. I could smell something then, a faint, sweet, cloying aroma, like decaying flowers and old paper. The smell was so distinct, it clawed at my senses even after the paralysis broke. It was after that episode that I started finding other things. The next object was a small, ornate button. It wasn't just any button. It was old, made of tarnished silver, intricately carved with what looked like a stylized three-pronged symbol. It lay on my desk, right beside my laptop, sparkling faintly under the morning light. I spent hours searching my apartment, baffled. I don't own clothes with buttons like that. My grandmother's old sewing kit, which I inherited, had nothing similar. This was a unique, antique piece, almost certainly valuable, and definitely not something I'd ever seen before. The implication was sickening. It wasn't just leaving ethereal objects like feathers. It was leaving things with a history, things that had clearly belonged to someone else. It was invading not just my space, but also its space. The sleep paralysis visitor was becoming more than just a nocturnal tormentor. It was a thief, or perhaps a collector. My carefully constructed reality, where things had logical explanations, was dissolving piece by piece. I started documenting everything. I bought a small, cheap journal and began to log the dates of the episodes, descriptions of the whispers, and, most disturbingly, what new objects I found. I even tried setting up a webcam to record myself sleeping, but the footage was always blank, just me lying still. The camera never picked up any shadows, any movement, anything out of the ordinary. It only amplified my sense of isolation and doubt. Was I going insane? Was this an elaborate delusion? I questioned my own sanity daily, but the objects were undeniably real. The objects varied. After the button, there was a small polished stone, smooth and black, that felt strangely warm to the touch even when left out in my cool room. Then a single, dried rose petal, pressed flat, radiating the same faint, sweet scent I'd detected during one of my episodes. Each item was small, easily overlooked, but undeniably alien to my apartment. They were always found near my bed, or on my nightstand, or on my desk, places I'd been staring at during the paralysis. It was as if the visitor was making sure I would see them. It was a macabre game of show and tell, and I was the unwilling audience. The whispers from the dark would often precede these new additions, as if the entity was announcing its gifts. I tried talking to a doctor initially, vaguely describing sleep issues and stress, but omitting the more fantastical details. The doctor suggested sleep hygiene, stress reduction, maybe therapy. I even went to a few therapy sessions, but trying to articulate, "A shadow man keeps leaving strange trinkets in my room," felt impossible, even to me. I knew I'd sound unhinged. So I retreated, keeping my terrifying secret locked away, becoming increasingly isolated. My friends noticed I was distant, tired, and jumpy, but I just blamed creative burnout. How could I explain that my nightmares were manifesting physically? The fear wasn't just confined to my nights anymore. It seeped into my days. I found myself obsessively checking my room, scanning every surface when I returned home, half expecting to find something new, even in broad daylight. The objects felt like breadcrumbs, leading me down a path I didn't want to follow. But where were they from? What did they mean? They didn't seem to follow a pattern, except that they were always small, old-looking, and seemed to possess a subtle, unsettling aura. It was almost as if they were talismans, imbued with a fragment of the visitor's essence. One particularly disturbing instance involved a small, yellowed scrap of paper. It appeared on my pillow one morning. It wasn't just any scrap. It was an old fortune cookie fortune, crinkled and faded, but the words were still legible. A secret revealed will change your path forever. My blood ran cold when I read it. I never ate fortune cookies. My apartment was spotless. It felt like a direct message, a veiled threat or a prophecy. The message seemed to imply knowledge, suggesting that the visitor wasn't just a random manifestation, but something with an agenda, something actively trying to communicate. My mind reeled. It wasn't just leaving things, it was leaving messages. This escalation pushed me to my breaking point. I began researching everything I could find about sleep paralysis beyond the medical explanations. I delved into folklore, paranormal accounts, anything that might offer an alternative interpretation. I read about succubi, incubi, shadow people, and various entities that prey on the sleeping. It was a desperate attempt to find a framework, a name, a set of rules for this terrifying game I was trapped in. It was a futile effort. Nothing quite fit. My visitor wasn't draining my energy or seducing me. It was leaving gifts. Unsettling, archaic, and deeply personal gifts. The frequency of the episodes increased dramatically. It felt like every other night I was waking up, trapped, with the visitor at my bedside, its presence heavier, its whispers more insistent. I started getting nosebleeds in the morning, which I'd never experienced before, and developed persistent headaches. My body was under immense stress, but my mind was even more so. I started to believe the visitor was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each terrifying encounter. The objects it left behind were no longer just unsettling. They felt like taunts. They were physical proof that it could breach the veil, and I was powerless to stop it. Each new discovery was a fresh assault on my sanity, a further blurring of what was real and what was merely a figment of my shattered imagination. We're about to go deeper into this, and the story only gets darker from here. If you're enjoying this account and want to support the channel, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to it. The very air in my room felt charged, heavy with a pervasive and unseen energy. I started to question if the items were actually appearing spontaneously, or if perhaps they were always there, and the paralysis simply allowed me to see them, though that didn't explain their foreign nature. This ambiguity was almost as terrifying as the reality. One night, the episode was different. The pressure was there, the inability to move, but the visitor wasn't just looming. It was at my side, and I could feel a cold, dry touch against my cheek. I tried to scream, to lash out, but my body refused to obey. The whispers were right next to my ear, closer than ever, and for the first time, I felt a distinct, frigid breath against my skin. The smell of decaying flowers was overpowering. When I finally broke free, I shot upright, gasping, my hand flying to my cheek. It was cold, tingling with a strange sensation, as if I'd been touched by something not entirely there. My eyes darted to my nightstand. There, gleaming faintly in the darkness, was a small, antique silver locket. It was closed, intricately engraved with a leaf pattern, and felt impossibly heavy for its size. This wasn't just a trinket anymore. This felt like a trophy, a deliberate personal offering left right where I'd been touched. My heart pounded an erratic rhythm against my ribs. The gifts were escalating. They were becoming more personal, more significant, and the entity leaving them was growing increasingly bold. I grasped the locket, feeling the ancient, cold metal against my palm, and for the first time, a truly terrifying thought solidified in my mind. It wasn't just leaving things in my room. My sleep paralysis visitor was leaving things for me, and it was waiting for me to open them. The locket was cold and heavy in my hand, a silent challenge laid at my feet by the sleep paralysis visitor. I didn't open it immediately. I couldn't. The fear was too paralyzing, the implications too profound. It felt like opening Pandora's box, inviting something even more sinister into my already fractured reality. For days, the locket sat on my desk, a dark, gleaming enigma. I'd stare at it, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every horrifying consequence of engaging with whatever intelligence was behind these occurrences. The thought that it wanted me to open it, to interact with its gifts, sent shivers down my spine. It was no longer just an observer, but an active participant, drawing me deeper into its twisted game. The episodes didn't stop during this time. If anything, they intensified. The visitor was a constant, pressing presence, its form now often clearer, more defined, still shadowy, but with discernible limbs, a head, sometimes even the suggestion of long, trailing hair or tattered clothes. The whispers were a relentless drone, sometimes sounding like multiple voices, sometimes a single, low rumble that seemed to emanate directly from my bed frame. I was perpetually exhausted, my body aching, my mind a fog of fear and sleep deprivation. I barely ate, barely slept, and the once comfortable sanctuary of my room had become a cage, a hunting ground. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the locket was a turning point. It was either open it or succumb to this relentless psychological warfare. One evening, desperation finally overshadowed my fear. I picked up the locket. It was even heavier than it looked, possessing an almost magnetic pull. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the clasp. It was stiff, old, and resisted my attempts. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and with a soft click, it sprang open. Inside, nestled against the tarnished silver, were two things: a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper, smaller than my thumbnail, and a single, almost microscopic strand of what looked like human hair, as fine as spider silk and startlingly white. My heart hammered against my ribs. I carefully unfolded the paper with the tip of a pin. The script was ancient, spidery, and written in a language I didn't recognize, yet it felt eerily familiar, like the cadence of the whispers. It was a single cryptic symbol, a swirling, interconnected pattern that looked like an eye within a web, or perhaps a stylized spider itself. The white hair, impossibly delicate, seemed to hold a faint, static charge. It wasn't just old, it felt ancient, carrying with it the undeniable chill of something long dead, yet still present. The meaning of the symbol and the hair eluded me, but their presence felt like an intimate, deeply disturbing revelation, connecting the visitor to something far older, far more personal than I had ever imagined. That night was the worst. I fell into a fitful slumber, the image of the locket's contents still burning in my mind. I woke, as always, to the crushing weight and the utter inability to move. But this time, the visitor was not merely at the foot of my bed. It was standing over me, almost fully materialized, a towering, gaunt figure, its body obscured by what looked like a tattered, dark cloak, but its head was distinct. It was elongated, almost insect-like, with unnervingly large black eyes that seemed to absorb all light. Its limbs were too long, too thin, ending in delicate, spindly fingers that now hovered just above my face. The smell of decaying flowers was so strong it made my eyes water. The whispers were not just whispers anymore. They were a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, swirling around me, each one overlapping, weaving a tapestry of unintelligible dread. But then one voice broke through, clearer, colder, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You understand now." The words were agonizingly slow, drawn out, and filled with a chilling finality. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "You understand now." Understand what? The symbol, the hair, its nature. My mind raced, trying to grasp the meaning, but fear had locked away all coherent thought. As the voice spoke, one of its spindly fingers, impossibly long and pale, reached down and gently touched my eyelid. It wasn't a painful touch, but it was profoundly violating, a direct physical contact that broke every remaining barrier between my reality and its. I could feel the cold, dry texture of its skin, the faint, chitinous quality of its fingernail. Then with agonizing slowness, the visitor retracted its hand. Its large, black eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and for the first time, I felt something akin to recognition in their depths, a perverse satisfaction. It wasn't just observing, it was acknowledging, and it knew that I knew. The whispers intensified, building to a crescendo, and the figure began to recede, dissolving back into the shadows from which it had come. As it faded, my gaze fell upon my nightstand. The locket lay open, its contents exposed, but now beside it was one more object. It was another feather, identical to the first, but this one was black, as dark as polished obsidian, and curled around a single, perfectly smooth human tooth. The paralysis lifted abruptly, leaving me gasping, screaming, scrambling backwards until I hit the headboard. I stared at the tooth, pristine and white against the dark feather, a sickeningly intimate final gift. It wasn't just any tooth, it was a canine, pointed and sharp. It felt like a piece of me, yet it was undeniably alien. The implication was horrific. It wasn't just leaving things it found, it was leaving things it took, or perhaps things it made. The cycle of my encounters with this sleep paralysis visitor had reached a terrifying apex. It had left me with a collection of its treasures, a piece of its history, and now a chilling trophy of its ultimate intrusion. I moved out of that apartment within a week, leaving everything behind, the locket and its grim contents included. I couldn't bear to touch them again, let alone take them with me. I threw away the plastic box with the first feather, too. It felt like burning bridges, tearing up roots. I moved to a different city, a different climate, changed my routine, my lifestyle. I even went to therapy, this time confessing every horrifying detail. But the therapist, while empathetic, could only offer coping strategies for extreme anxiety and dissociation. I have not experienced sleep paralysis in my new home, not once, but the fear remains. The encounters may have ceased, but the psychological scars run deep. Every shadow in my new apartment, every creak of the floorboards, every inexplicable cold spot sends my heart racing. I still occasionally smell that cloying, sweet, decaying flower scent in moments of stress, a phantom aroma that conjures the image of the towering shadow and its whispering voice. I still find myself compulsively checking my personal belongings, my desk, my nightstand, half expecting to find some new, impossible trinket. The fear that it could find me again, that the objects were not simply left behind but were markers that would eventually lead it back, is a constant, gnawing dread. I carry the memory of its touch, the sound of its voice, the image of those black eyes, and the chilling knowledge that it knew I would open the locket, that it knew I would understand. What I understood, I'm still not entirely sure, but it changed me forever. The whispers may have stopped, but the silence is far more terrifying, for I always wonder what it is doing, wherever it is, and if it's merely biding its time. Sometimes late at night, when the house is utterly silent, I swear I hear the faintest rustle, like dry leaves skittering, just beyond the edge of hearing. I can't shake the feeling that the silence isn't an absence, but a presence, a holding of breath, a patient waiting. And I know deep in my bones that the visitor didn't just leave things in my room. It left a piece of itself, and it took a piece of me. The tooth, it's a constant, horrifying question mark in my mind. Was it a gift, a warning, a fragment of its own distorted anatomy? Or was it a chilling promise of what was to come, a piece of my future, left behind like a calling card? I may never know, and that unknowing is perhaps the most unsettling wind down of all.